Welcome to Embracing Autism IRL. Today, we're excited to welcome Mitch Leppicello, a clinical social worker with 35 years of experience working with autistic and neurodiverse individuals of all ages. Over the years, Mitch has presented to and consulted with schools, clinics, and centers, offering strategies and tools to support parents and caregivers in their vital yet challenging roles. Welcome, Mitch.
Hey, Leah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. Can you tell me a little bit more about the work that you do as it relates to autism?
Oh my gosh, I have really enjoyed my 30 plus years of working with people with autism. I kind of fell into it. I just accidentally heard about one of a client of a colleague of mine with Asperger's syndrome. You remember that term, right? So that's kind of how I first heard about autism, and or maybe the second time, but that was the one that really clued me into like, wait a minute. Asperger's is really similar, and the characteristics of Asperger's is really similar to a lot of clients I have right now in my clinical practice. And so I just started to kind of investigate the whole thing, and I found like we've been missing a lot. So I really just decided to just go in all in on that and really understand and see people a little differently than I a lot differently actually than I had previously. So and then I really enjoyed working with so many kids and families over the years and helping other people understand autism and neurodiversity. Um, yeah, so
Yeah, I think I found you through one of your newsletters that you had that I found was really helpful and informational. So I had kind of subscribed to that, and you had put one out that kind of drew my attention. I know that we just barely missed it. We're now shy in October, but we just passed September, which was Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And that's when one of these interesting emails came by. So I wanted to ask you, what do we know about the correlation between autism and an increased risk of suicide? Because I know that I have definitely anecdotally seen kind of a stronger correlation in that demographic.
yeah. Well, it actually it's just being studied more lately. So when I first came into working with people with Asperger's and autism, um, and I'll just refer to kind of ASD or autism from this point forward. I don't think we use Asperger's too much anymore. Um, but so when I first came on, I recognized a lot of kids just having a lot of difficulty communicating their comorbidity of depression, anxiety, and we'll get into some of that in detail in just a bit. But and some of the more latest research is 5 times more than people with who are neurotypical or without ASD. So the latest research is kind of alarming even to me. I actually didn't think it was even, I thought it was maybe higher, but not 5 times higher. So that has really it kind of encouraged me to just speak about it more and to talk more about how to look for these signs and helping people identify these signs. Isn't that wild? Five
Wow.
times. Yeah,
Yeah, that's crazy. That's pretty significant. Can you
it's really significant.
explain maybe why individuals on the spectrum might be more likely, or were there any trends or anything that came out of that that kind of indicated why that difference might be so significant?
Yeah, like many things ASD, we're learning so much more. Like, ASD is behind the 8 ball when it comes to studying depression, anxiety, and all this stuff. Like, we're just coming into that now. And so I think, like many things, we're discovering that before present time, there were just poor screening tools for ASD. It might have been 5 times before that, but now like we're understanding ASD in different ways and different thinkers and we're so the screening tools that they had back in the day for depression were really set up for people neurotypical folks and so now the understanding and better screening tools and clinical diagnostic interviews are probably um, part of that increase. They do talk about, why that is higher, and and that led to it. And then the other things that are leading to it are just our societal kind of goings on, our environment. COVID was a big time in our life, and we're going to talk about it for a while probably, because it did contribute to a lot of changes in the how in how people with ASD responded and reacted to that, to COVID and isolation.
So changes is definitely something that's difficult for autistic individuals, that change in routine that
Absolutely.
you mentioned. What else do you think might be making the autistic population particularly vulnerable to these mental health challenges?
Well, okay, so the poor screening tools, family history. So we probably didn't ask about a lot of family history of depression for people with ASD. Um, we we think about how life transitions for people who are neurotypical create a little bit of stress. Well, now we have to go, oh, we know transitions, as you say, and change is difficult. So, how many life transitions are there? Well, every time a child goes through one, whether it's from elementary to middle school, or middle school to high school, um, from one school to another school, you're changing schools, from teachers. I mean, there's just so many, changes and transitions that kids go through and young adults go through, that can trigger just how do I communicate that? So let's get to that one. That's another piece, is communication. How do they communicate that? And that's just different. And that's where we need to get better interview and screening tools, and better interview questions, different ways of reading nonverbal communication for people with ASD.
I think that it was something that stood out to me when you sent out this newsletter, because one of the things that I immediately thought of was, this isn't a topic that people really talk about too much. I think it might be on the back of people's minds, but it seems like talking about mental health and suicide awareness, it just seems like it's a taboo subject. And because of that, people are kind of like skittish around the subject. So it's something that I think is actually quite important to discuss, particularly when it comes to the autism community. And I wanted to kind of jump in a little bit more and
Mhm.
talk about that myth of, talking about suicide plants the idea in somebody's mind. Can we talk a little bit about how to break this myth, and especially as we're referring to autistic individuals here, what we can do to kind of start that conversation?
Absolutely, Leah. I'm so glad you brought that up, and I mean, that myth really crosses all neurotypical, ASD, neurodiverse folks. I mean, everybody. The myth that talking about a challenge is going to create the challenge is a myth. Let's just say that. So my strategies for parents, for teachers, for other clinicians is to dive into, to open up these conversations and communications. What happens is, for people with ASD, is and I've heard this from them, and so in my experience, they're telling me, Mitch, when you hear, if somebody doesn't talk about a topic, then I'm not supposed to talk about it. My social, I'm trying to navigate the social world, and when there's not a topic brought up, I don't bring it up. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, how wild is that?" So no one's asking you about this, so you're not gonna bring it up, And so then we start to bring up things that are challenging. I mean, and suicidality and suicidal thinking, and serious depressive feelings and processes going on are sure things that people with ASD need to know, that it's okay to talk about. It's okay to talk about these bad feelings that they have inside their head. That sort of um, the ASD bubble, the autistic bubble that some kids describe having. And adults describe having, is, I just keep it in my head. I can really keep things in my head, Mitch. And like, I bet you can. So they have a strong ability to suppress and repress these really intense feelings and emotions. And if we don't, like, knock, knock, like, it's okay. Come on, come on out of there and talk to us about how you're feeling and how these feelings are so intense. They won't. They'll just keep it right inside their head, and that can really do a lot of damage over time.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point because there's 2 things that I've learned about autism. One of them is that a lot of autistic individuals struggle to even identify their own emotions. So there's some comorbidity of, I always forget the name of it, but it's kind of like you feel things in your body, you feel things in your mind, but you don't quite understand what emotion that is that you're feeling or identifying. So it's hard to talk about it if you can't even like put a label to it. So that's one of the things that I've noticed. The other one that I've noticed is there is also kind of like not necessarily a taboo, but, like, when you're being taught how to socialize, quote, unquote, "appropriately," it's difficult to understand when is it appropriate to talk about this? When is it not appropriate? Who is it
Right.
appropriate to talk about this? Who would I maybe scare off by talking about this?
Right.
So, I think that you make
Exactly.
a great point there that it's really like, what might be really simple for somebody else who's neurotypical is actually, like, overwhelmingly complex for somebody who doesn't understand those social rules.
Right. Right. I
And
read it. I think so. I think the word you're looking for, if I'm, and if it's not, then we'll keep looking for. But I think it's alexithymia,
yes, I
which
can
is the
I can
condition.
never I can't even read that word, let alone say it. I can never remember it because it's so
It's funny.
complicated to
It's
me.
spelt a couple of different ways too.
Yeah.
I see it spelled like, wait, what? But I don't. It doesn't matter. It's that, right? So it's kind of a I say to the kids that I work with, I'm like, okay, you ready for a fancy word? Here's a fancy word, and they're like, what's that word? And well, this is the difficulty. And they're like, how did you know? And I'm like, because the kid before you describes it, and the kid before that, and 30 years of, um, kids and
Yeah.
adults talking about it, you know.
So is
So,
that something that you've
so
commonly
alexithymia.
kind of seen?
No, it's a real thing. It's a real thing. It is the difficulty. There's another interesting part, which is the emotional sensitivity. Um, People with ASD have pretty high degrees of sensitivity and low degrees of sensitivity. There's highs and lows, right? Hyper, hypo, um, and so they might feel like um, I
Like
when kids
rejection
ask me, Mitch,
sensitive stuff?
yes, rejection sensitive, or just things that maybe a neurotypical person might just let it come in and let it go out really fast, kind of process it like whatever. But um, an adult with ASC might just hold on to that and go, "How did I screw up? I screwed up. How did I screw up? What did I say? What was wrong with that?" And just perseverate and ruminate and ruminate and ruminate. And again, not getting that out there, like, who can I tell? Who can I say? Not nobody. Keep it in, keep it quiet, keep it quiet.
See,
That is just it just eats away, it eats away, it eats away.
I
Um,
smile because I don't know if I told you, but I actually have an autism diagnosis. My children are autistic, and that was one of my biggest things is after
oh
social
no.
interactions, and my husband's been there for them. I would be like afterwards, I'd be like, "How did that go? I don't know. How did that go? I don't understand." And it
Right.
like that's another thing that a lot of
Oh,
autistic individuals are struggling with is kind of like this elevated sense of anxiety that a lot of individuals don't have that I think would
right.
probably influence that, mental health capacity or the potential for having more depression and anxiety in general.
Right. Right.
So
Potential, propensity. I mean, well, it just skyrockets, and it can be little things. It can be the story of somebody being bullied, teased, tormented. It doesn't even have to happen to the person with AST. It can just be like, I, you know, I heard a story about, or somebody's cat, died or passed away. Those emotions can just really eat away. And not that those things are direct correlation to feeling suicidal or that, but it's all that over time.
yeah,
And of
it's
course
like
there
the
are the more
intensity.
the intensity, right. So you
Yeah.
can really relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I also have an older
Yeah.
daughter who is quite hyper empathetic,
Okay.
and we have seen it.
Right. Right. That hyper empathy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a real
So
thing for sure.
so what would you then recommend to parents and caregivers of autistic individuals to do to be able to start these conversations or have these like difficult conversations with their children if maybe they sense that they're having that difficulty?
So one of my soapboxes is shame. I am up to here and past with how our systems are set up to shame children and young adults into behaving. Um, and so I'm trying to help people understand that behavior is a communication. It is not an unlawful activity that needs jail time. And that is sarcasm. I feel like every time there's a bad behavior, there is some bad, you know, punishment to that. And what I'm trying to help people understand is that it's not punishment that they need. It's not more shame and guilt to behave better. It's helping them understand what those emotions are. It's addressing the alexithymia. It's addressing the hyper empathy. It's addressing all those emotions that they feel that they cannot express, you know? So, for example, we know kids with ASD make social guffaws and social mistakes. Again, one of those high propensity things, right? So they're trying to fit in, they're trying to say something. And they might call a kid a name. They might say, dude, you're so fat because he just like an hour earlier heard at the lunch table at, in the cafeteria that, these kids, ribbing each other about being fat or being ugly or being whatever. And so he's like, oh, this is the way I'm going to try to make a friend with my buddy. And I'm going to call him that. And then of course, because it happens for kids with ASD, there's like an adult right there listening, and then that kid gets punished for something, and then they feel, as you
Yeah.
know, and as you can imagine, I'm sure you've heard the same stories I've heard over the years that it's just it's torment to them. It's like I was trying to be a friend. I was trying to connect with that kid. I was trying to use my best social skills. I'm learning from my surroundings. And so what happens is then subsequently they get punished. Now, what I'm trying to help people change is take that child aside and say, hey, I saw that you were trying to connect to that kid. You know what? And that was a mistake. Let's do it differently. What are we going to do differently? Did you read
Mhm.
the expression on that child's face? I don't need to shame. I don't need to punish. I need to help them with skills. So I'm all about skills. We need to take the emotional intensity and whether they did it intentional or on purpose or all that just out of the equation. I'm just so tired of hearing how many people know why kids do the things they do and they don't. They just want to connect.
Yeah.
We need more kids on their side just being able to say, listen, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to say, you know, and who's there to help me? Who are my who are my who are my protectors? Who are my social guides, my consultants when I'm not sure about how to communicate, to teachers and kids and those kinds of things. So I have like a so I made like a little that was a very long story. Sorry about that. I made a little step series. So there's 3 steps to making a mistake. And it's really just super basic. It's just acknowledge the mistake, fix the mistake, and plan for the next time. Like it's very preventative, it's very proactive. It's one and we're done and we're moving on to the next one. So we're not focused on like how did that child feel? That child feels really bad. They know how bad child feels. We don't need to berate them or anyway. Okay,
Yeah.
that's my
I think
soapbox. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no, because, like, that is honestly quite relatable because we
Yeah,
have a lot of struggles with that with, one of our children. We have 2 autistic children, and one of them is the more impulsive, behavioral, hyperactive type, and, like, like, the vocal stimming and all sorts of things, and I cannot tell you how many times she has gotten in trouble because of that, and it's so hard to, like,
right.
communicate that to people. That's, like, it's not intentional and it's just so difficult, but it's hard when people don't really understand autism, like, to people who aren't in that world all the time, it really does
Right.
look like a
Right.
child misbehaving, like, making the choice to misbehave. So, it's difficult to have that conversation.
It is really difficult. Let's keep at it. Let's keep trying, right?
Yeah.
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 And I mean, the reason that's important is because I know for me growing up, those misunderstandings really did impact my self-esteem. I grew up dealing with things like anxiety and, low self-esteem, low self-worth, all because of basically how I was treated by the outside world due to what
Right.
I did not know at the time was autism. So I was wondering from your perspective, what are some behavioral cues that parents and caregivers should pay attention to that might kind of clue them in to potential suicide risk or maybe even like depression risk when it comes to autistic individuals?
I mean, any kind of, big picture, any emotional dysregulated state can lead a child to do something. What I would like to look for, what I didn't get to, Leah, is
Mhm.
is when is the unintentional, or what sometimes are categorized as sort of, it's not mistake, suicide, but where they might be
Kind of impulsive.
kind of impulsive, right? And they don't, right, and they're not sure what to do about something, and they do it and they die, and that's a really super sad thing. Um and so I think opening that channel up to talking about your feelings, and that's the hardest thing for people with ASD to do, is to talk about it, but we need to start there. And if we can't talk about it, let's do something about our feelings. Let's swing about our feelings. Let's jump on the trampoline about our feelings. Let's write some poetry. Let's sing a song. Let's write a song. Let's play the drums. Let's go, shoot baskets. Whatever it is, we need to help them um, learn those skills and learn those strategies for self-regulation.
That is so important.
I don't even know if there's an end time to that. It's just forever, because every transition, right? We talked about at the beginning, every transition has its own set of stressors. So what are the coping strategies for every one of those life transitions? And the more we know when they're younger, you know, the more confidence they have to build them when they get to be young adults.
Yeah. Do you think there's any kind of like red flags that parents should look out for?
Sure, yeah. Sorry, I missed that cue, but yes, let's definitely talk about red flags. And the red flags are for sure statements. Let's talk about statements for just a sec. So when a child says, "I want to kill myself," we always, 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 always have to assess the danger. I mean, it's kind of like when someone has a panic attack, and it might be a heart attack. It's not often a heart attack, but we don't go, "Oh, it's probably a panic attack." One you die from, one you don't. This is kind of like suicide, like like I want to kill myself. We always have to assess. So kids who say that they are feeling suicidal, we always have to listen to, assess that, take action for that. When it comes out that it's just, I don't know what else to say, I don't know how to talk about my feelings, that's a really blunt thing to say. I want to die. um, then we help them with different ways to communicate feelings. One of the ways that I help kids talk through that, and adults, is through identifying, really just kind of taking a bigger picture approach called stress, and just sort of ways of managing stress, because it
Mm,
usually starts small in ways that are stress every day in our life. We have a little bit of stress. How do we cope every little bit? So other warning signs might be um, experiences of something bad that happened, that they say, that they minimize, social isolation, and that's hard because kids with ASD tend to socially isolate. Sometimes they do it to self-regulate, right? Like, I need some
mhm.
space. Um, so the other big one is self-harm. Any kind of scratching, cutting, um, substance use and abuse, um, certainly is an indicator. Um, uh, Hints about it. How did so and so feel about dying or those kinds of things. Any verbal kinds of things about it is really your opportunity to open up and talk about those feelings.
Mhm. Yeah. I think one of the things that is challenging is sometimes because of what we were talking about before, where autistic people kind of mirror maybe what their peers are doing or saying without really understanding the repercussions. That can also get into murky territory because sometimes they might just be mimicking something, thinking, well, when I'm upset, this is what I'm supposed to do. And they might not
Right,
necessarily always know exactly what they're doing in that sense. Have you
right,
have you ever seen that?
right, right. Well, when it comes to, I mean, there are so many variations on that. I have not personally e- had a client um, that ended their
Mhm.
life, that suicided, and so um, I've worked with lots and lots of kids who have felt like they do want to die, like they do want to end their life, um, and so we get them that help. I'll say that the higher percentage of kids that I see are in a state of major depression. So the risk of suicide is high, um, but it's more like they don't want to die. They just don't want to feel the way they feel. They want life to
Mm.
change. They want to feel better, actually. Um, so I, um,
That makes sense,
yeah.
though.
So they just, and I don't know, it could be my memory, and this is anecdotal. And I've seen a lot of people over the years who have felt bad and depressed. Excuse me for just a sec.
So one of the key challenges for individuals with autism is expressing emotions. I was wondering if you had any specific strategies or tools that can help parents better tune into and understand their child's emotional state.
Absolutely. So because of the alexithymic effect, we're trying all kinds of different things. And sometimes feeling words are the worst words to start with. A lot of people see kids who are manifesting rage and anger. Well, that's a sign of depression and anxiety. It certainly can be a sign. And so we want to identify as not one word like, why are you angry? Because if we say, why are you angry? And they're not internally angry, we have missed a whole opportunity for them to talk about their sad, their grief, their shame, their fears. So we want to start a bit bigger picture with, you look like you're feeling bad. Let's talk about it. Let's do something about these feelings. So feel free to stay in the big picture, stay broad about that. Again, I use the definition of stress. And I created a book just recently called My Stress Book, which is full of just exercises and tools around using 3 colors, 10 numbers, 3 levels, and just rate it. I need to know, more importantly, how bad you feel than the word you feel.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's the intensity, not the word. There are infinite words to describe emotions. Often, all those infinite words together in one word, they can't find that word, right? So I think it's more important to find the intensity and the level. And that does something actually that's connected to Dr. Porges's, um, you know, um, uh, uh, trauma kind of response to things. So when we're in calm state, we use, how to plan for that, how to use those coping strategies. When we're in high states of stress, we're in fight or flight, we're hyper vigilant, we're in hyper fear. And so when parents are trying to solve the problem down here and their anxiety is up here, then um, they're not able to help them. And
Yeah.
so we need parents to understand that, and educators as well. And so there's lots of different versions of the stress scale and my stress book kind of strategies. But I just have kids say, just give me a color. So for example, I'll just plan out, I'll say, okay, in your school day, start with the beginning of the day. What, 0 to 10, your first class, boom, we go through all, like, 6 and 7 specials and everything in there. And I'll say, let's just rate each one right now as you're sitting here. And so they'll rate, and there might be like, 4 or 5 might be either no stress or green, and then there's one red and one yellow, and their whole day turns south because of that one particular and that one might just
Mhm.
be a sensory intrusion in their day. It might be a disconnect in the relationship with the teacher. It might be like, I think that teacher thinks I'm bad, wrong, stupid. And so my stress is going to go up. I can't think, I can't communicate. Um, and so we have just been able to pinpoint an area to start working on.
Yeah,
Why
I've
can't parents do
definitely
that? Right?
I've definitely noticed in, like, my eldest that she will ruminate over one little thing. Like, if she feels like she did something wrong and was, like, scolded for it in school or something like that, like, it will ruin her entire day, and all she can do is just think about that one thing that she feels like she made a
Right.
mistake in.
Right. Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
tragic, right? I mean, it's like, wait a minute, how did that? Right. So helping them through that. And then what are the self-regulation strategies? So stress is any negative thoughts or beliefs about yourself or others. So it's a pretty broad definition. But when they think about that, like, oh, okay, I mean, they can actually rate, you know, nope, I don't feel bad about that at all. In fact, that class gives me, oh, you have positive stress, negative stress and positive stress even. So now we get to talk about eustress and distress and how they're different. Oh, that class is giving you some good brain chemical stuff. All right, we got to keep that in mind for, when we need that. So, yeah, all those things about helping them manage and monitor their own stress um, gets them feeling self-confident, um, independent in how they navigate even relationships. When you think about that friend and what happened with that 0 to 10, rate it. Oh, it's like a 6. I felt like I screwed up somewhere somehow. Okay. Well, are you feeling like you need to get calm and get control, or is there some problem solving we need to do around that? Well, let's try some problem solving. Okay. So I'm
Yeah,
running through
that's
it kind of
really
quickly,
cool.
but
That's pretty interesting though to have like those kind of tools to be able to use in a conversation with your child. I was wondering though, what happens? Like, when do you know what is the line that gets crossed when it comes to thinking, okay, this outside of my hands, this is something I as a parent cannot handle, and I'm going to need to have some sort of like professional help. How do you know when to determine that or how to determine that?
right. That's when I get a phone call. I think you can reach out to parents and professionals who, um, you know, uh, well, there are parent groups, there are parent support groups. One I have been co-facilitating here in Stillwater schools for the past 10 years or so. So if you have an opportunity to belong to an ASD parent support group, that's a great place to go to talk to other parents. And that's what I love about that group, is that I'm just facilitating, but parents are really, working with what worked for them. Um, and then there's obviously, if we're looking for professional help, then they just need to reach one of their providers. Of
Okay, and I do have a question for you that is something I like to ask all of my guests. Our podcast
course.
is called Embracing Autism, and it means something different to everyone. I was wondering, what does the concept of
Mhm.
embracing autism mean to you specifically?
Mm. It really just it's an unending desire to understand ASD as much as I possibly can, um, until people with ASD stop calling me, stop knocking on my door. I mean, I want them to come to me and go, my ASD is rocking and I love it and I am solid and I feel great about myself and whatever I have. So embracing autism to me is just a real solid understanding of what it's like for people with ASD, and to um, help them feel good about who they are.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for this information. Before we head out, are there any additional resources that you can share with my audience or anywhere that they should go looking?
Yeah, absolutely. The website, my website, asdparentingjourney.com, and there they can find my stress book. I also have other resources from other people who have done some really fantastic things. I mean, I have learned from so many people and have shared so many resources from everywhere. So uh, so I do have a kind of a resource section on my website as well. I think the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, I wanted to put that one out there. sprc.org, sprc.org. We have a great local one that's on my website. It's kind of the East Metro Suicide Prevention Collaborative Minnesota. That's just for folks that are probably here in Minnesota, but there's some great information on that website as well. So we really want to pay attention to the potential for suicide, the potential for bad depression, anxiety, and parents, you can really help your child. You can really do a lot. Um, so
And
yeah.
where can the parents follow you? I think you're on social media, right?
Yep, social media on Instagram, on Facebook, and I like LinkedIn because I'm learning so much about all the different people that are talking about employment, vocational opportunities. Oh my gosh, there's so much going on LinkedIn. It's really kind of cool, all the different things that people are talking about. And so that's been a fun new social media place. A lot of people don't think about that as a fun social media place, but I've been
It
learning a
is for the
lot.
professionals, yes.
Right, right, right.
So, for
Yeah,
those
yeah,
of
yeah.
you
So,
for those of you listening on audio only, the Instagram and Facebook is at ASD Parenting Journey. Again, that's Instagram and Facebook. Thank you so much, Mitch, for coming onto the podcast today. I think this is a really critical topic and one that doesn't get discussed enough. And so
yeah,
hopefully our listeners will get some information from this that'll help them out. Again, if you're listening and this is something that you feel like your autistic child is struggling with, or if you're an autistic individual yourself, his website again is asdparentjourney.com for more information and resources. Thank you, Mitch, so much for coming on the show.
thank you, Leah. Thank you for all you do at embracing autism.
Thank you so much.